boy found him at dusk, a man broken and bleeding, left for dead in the dry riverbed. His uniform was torn, one leg bent wrong, he wasn't breathing. Kofi, barefoot and alone, saw the faintest twitch in the man's hand. He was still alive. And in that moment, a 14-year-old orphan with nothing made a choice that would cost him everything. He would carry this stranger 30 miles, not knowing the dying soldier was General Joseph Osai, and that this act of mercy was about to ignite a war. Kofi had been surviving in the bush since his village was destroyed. Every day was a battle against thirst, hunger, and the silence. He knew the rule: you kept moving, you cared for yourself, you never looked back. But today he broke it, and that decision would pull him into a hidden conflict where generals disappear and boys become targets. This is the true story of a 30-mile journey that changed a nation, and the child who started it by refusing to let a stranger die alone. His name was Kofi Mensah, and he had been alone for 217 days. He marked them with scratches on a piece of termite-hollowed wood he kept in his makeshift shelter, a lean-to of branches and torn plastic tucked against a granite outcrop. Each scratch was a victory. Each one meant he had found water, foraged enough wild roots or berries, and avoided the patrols. The soldiers called it a stabilization operation. The people in the scattered villages whispered the real name: the Purge. 6 months earlier, a sudden, violent coup had shattered the fragile peace. President Abeb, democratically elected but hopelessly corrupt, was overthrown in a single night of gunfire in the capital. The man who took power, Colonel Issa Dagadu, promised order. He delivered terror. His first decree was to neutralize all loyalist elements within the military, especially the revered old guard who had built the national army, generals like Joseph Os. Kofi knew none of this. He only knew the sound of trucks before dawn, the shouted orders, the screams that followed. His village, Ecuries, was caught in the middle. It sat near a strategic crossroads, a place both sides wanted to control. When the loyalist troops retreated through, the colonel's forces labeled the village collaborators. The punishment was total. Kofi was 12. He hid in the drainage cistern behind his family's compound, listening to the world he knew being erased. He never found his parents' bodies, he just ran. And so he learned the bush. He learned which insects were safe to eat, which mushrooms would kill him, how to find the faint animal trails that led to hidden water holes. His world shrank to a 5-mile radius of survival. The war became a distant thunder, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there, a constant background hum of fear. But this man, this broken soldier, was not distant. He was here. Up close, Kofi could see the details the dusk had hidden. The man's face was caked in dust and dried blood, one eye swollen shut. His khaki shirt, once crisp, was torn at the shoulder, and the dark patch on his leg wasn't mud. It was a bullet wound, crusted and angry. The man's chest rose once, a shallow, ragged intake, then fell. He was drowning on dry land. Every instinct screamed at Kofi to run. This man was danger. This man was death. Helping him would drain Kofi's precious water, slow him down, make him visible. It was the absolute opposite of every survival rule he had carved into his soul. He took a step back, his bare feet scraping on the dry river stones. Then the man's good eye opened, just a sliver. It found Kofi's face. There was no demand, no plea, just a quiet, profound exhaustion. And then it closed again. That was the moment that changed everything. It wasn't a cry for help. It was the absence of one. This man had already given up. And Kofi remembered the cistern. He remembered giving up. And he remembered choosing, minute by minute, not to. He knelt, he uncorked his gourd, the one he risked everything to fill each day, and let a few precious drops fall onto the man's cracked lips. There was no reaction. Kofi's mind raced. He couldn't carry him. The nearest place he knew of was Duaso, a trading post he'd spotted from a distance weeks ago. It was a full day's walk for him alone. With a full-grown man, impossible. But leaving him here was a death sentence. The hyenas would come at night, or the patrols. Kofi looked at the man's hands. They were strong, calloused, but clean. An officer's hands. This was no ordinary soldier. This fact settled in his stomach like a cold stone. An officer meant value. Value meant hunters. He had to move him. Now, he scrambled up the riverbank, searching for materials. He found 2 long, sturdy branches and used the vine rope from his shelter kit to lash them together with crosspieces, creating a crude drag litter. It took him 20 desperate minutes. Every second, he expected to hear engines. Back at the riverbed, he rolled the man onto the litter as gently as he could. The man groaned, a low sound of pure agony, but did not wake. Kofi took the front vines in his hands, turned his back, and began to pull. The weight was immense. The litter dug into the soft earth, catching on every rock and root. Within 50 yards, Kofi's arms were burning, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The sun was nearly gone. Night in the bush, with a trail a blind man could follow and a man who smelled of blood. He pulled for an hour, stopping every few minutes to listen. The jungle came alive around him with the sounds of night creatures. Each rustle was a soldier. Each pair of glowing eyes in the darkness was a rifle sight. He was exposed on the game trail he'd chosen, a faint line of slightly less dense vegetation. It was the only way. Suddenly he froze. A new sound cut through the insect hum, not an animal, the distant metallic growl of a diesel engine, then another. They were moving parallel to him, perhaps half a mile away on the old logging road. The colonel's patrols, looking for something, looking for someone. Kofi dragged the litter off the path, into the thick undergrowth. Thorns ripped at his legs and arms. He covered the man and the litter with fronds and crouched beside him, his hand clamped over his own mouth to silence his breathing. The headlights of 2 trucks swept through the trees, beams slicing the darkness. They slowed. A voice shouted an order. The engines idled. They were searching the area. Systematically, Kofi's heart hammered against his ribs so loudly he was sure they could hear it. The beams played over the foliage just 10 yards from their hiding place. A soldier coughed. Another laughed. The moment stretched, thin and terrible. Then an order. The engines revved and the trucks moved on, the sound fading into the night. Kofi didn't move for a long time. The cold truth was now undeniable. This man wasn't just wounded. He was the mission. They were hunting him, and Kofi was now in the crosshairs. As the first grey light of dawn stained the sky, Kofi made a decision. He couldn't go to Dwaso. It was the first place they would look. He had to get the man to Nkorkor, the proper town beyond the hills. It was farther, much farther. The distance unspooled in his mind, a brutal, unthinkable journey. But it was the only chance. He adjusted the vines on his shoulders, the rough fibers already wearing his skin raw. He looked down at the unconscious man. "Who are you?" he whispered. There was no answer, just the slow, shallow breath of a life clinging on. Kofi took the first step of the longest walk of his life. He did not know that in the capital, Colonel Dagadu was standing over a map, furious. A key piece had slipped from the board. General Osai was not in the morgue where he was supposed to be. He was missing. And the colonel had just one order for his men: find him before he talks, and kill anyone who has seen him. The first mile was agony. The second was a blur of pain. Kofi's world narrowed to the burning in his shoulders, the bite of the vines, and the sound of the litter scraping over the earth. He moved in a hunched-over shuffle, his small frame bent double against the weight. The general, though Kofi did not yet know that title, was a dead weight, his feverish body radiating heat through the makeshift stretcher. The bullet wound in his leg had begun to seep again. A dark stain spreading through the rough bandage Kofi had fashioned from his own shirt. By mid-morning, the sun was a brutal white eye in the sky. Thirst became a razor in Kofi's throat. His water gourd was already half empty, and he dared not drink more. He stopped every few hundred yards to trickle a few drops between the man's lips, massaging his throat to spur a swallow. Sometimes it worked. Often it didn't. The man's skin was frighteningly hot to the touch. The bush offered no comfort. The trail grew steeper, winding into the low, rocky hills that separated the river basin from the valley where Nkorkor lay. Each incline was a fresh torment. Kofi would have to find a new grip, plant his feet, and haul with every ounce of strength, the litter tipping precariously. Twice it almost overturned. On the second near spill, the man cried out, a short, sharp sound of pure anguish that echoed in the quiet trees. Kofi froze, panic flooding him. The sound felt like a beacon. He crouched, listening for minutes, hearing only the buzz of flies and the thump of his own heart. He was not wrong to be afraid. 20 miles to the east, in a commandeered schoolhouse that served as a sector headquarters, Colonel Dagadu's hunt was crystallizing into a grid search. Captain Arto, a man with cold eyes and a meticulous mind, stood before a map peppered with pins. "The crash site is here," he said, tapping a point near the dry river. "We recovered 2 bodies from the wrecked jeep. The driver and Captain Ajay. General Osai was not there. He was thrown or crawled away. blood trail suggests a northwesterly direction toward the hills. How far could a man with a leg wound go? Dagadu asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Alone, not far, a few kilometers at most, but we have a complication. Captain Arto placed another pin several miles northwest of the crash site. At 0900, a patrol on the old logging road reported signs of a disturbance off the trail. Broken foliage, drag marks, too wide for an animal. Someone moved something heavy, recently. Dagadu's eyes locked onto the new pin. He had help. It appears so, a villager perhaps, or a loyalist sympathizer hiding in the bush. The colonel leaned forward, his knuckles white on the table. This is no longer a recovery operation. This is an eradication. General Osai knows the locations of the hidden arms caches. He knows the identities of the remaining loyalist cell leaders. If he reaches a sympathetic town or a working radio, our entire position unravels. You will find him, and you will erase any witness. Is that understood? No exceptions. A child, a shepherd, a farmer, anyone who has laid eyes on him is a threat to the new state. Back on the hillside, Kofi knew none of these details, but he felt the principle of them in his bones. The air itself felt watchful. He abandoned the trail completely, striking out through denser woodland where the litter was even harder to pull, but the cover was thicker. Progress slowed to a crawl. His feet, tough as leather, were now cut and bleeding from sharp rocks and thorns. Hunger, a familiar ghost, began to gnaw with renewed vigor. He had not eaten since the previous day. In a small, shaded clearing, he finally stopped, his body giving out. He collapsed beside the litter, his chest heaving. He allowed himself one small sip of water. As he recorked the gourd, a weak voice spoke. "Boys!" Kofi jumped. The man's good eye was open, gazing at him with a lucidity that hadn't been there before. The voice was a dry rasp, but the authority in it was unmistakable. "You are pulling me." Kofi just nodded, unable to find words. "Why?" It was the same simple, devastating question. Kofi swallowed. "You were alive," he said, repeating his only logic. The man studied him for a long moment, his breathing labored. "Water," he finally said. Kofi helped him drink, more successfully this time. The man coughed, then winced, his hand going to his leg. "The wound, is it clean?" "I tried," Kofi said. "I used clean leaves." "It will not be enough." The man's head fell back. "You must leave me. They are hunting for me. You will die too." "I know they are hunting," Kofi said, a surprising hardness in his own voice. "I heard the trucks. I'm not going back to where they are looking. I am taking you to Nkorkor." The man's eye widened slightly. "Nkorkor, that is 30 miles. You know it." A faint, pained smile touched the man's lips. "I commanded the garrison there a lifetime ago." He looked at Kofi with new intensity. "What is your name?" Kofi Mensah." "Kofi, I am Joseph. You risk your life for a stranger named Joseph. You are either very brave or very foolish." "My village is gone," Kofi said flatly, the words leaving him before he could stop them. "There is no one left to be brave or foolish for." Silence hung between them, filled with the hum of the forest. Joseph Osa closed his eye. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "The men who did that, the men who are hunting me, they are the same." He opened his eye again, and the pain there was not just physical. "They betrayed their oath. They killed my soldiers in their beds. They are poisoning my country. I was going to expose them, to bring evidence to the border, to the international observers. That is why they shot down my jeep." The information washed over Kofi, too big, too political for him to fully grasp. But he understood betrayal. He understood poison. He nodded slowly. "Then we must get to Nkorkor." Joseph tried to shake his head, but the movement was too weak. "The garrison there, it may be compromised. The new commander, I do not know if he is loyal to the old army or to Dagadu. It is a gamble." "It is the only town I know," Kofi said, finality in his tone. He stood up, ignoring the scream of his muscles. He took up the vines again. The conversation had cost them precious time and energy. As he leaned into the pool, Joseph spoke once more, his voice barely audible. "If they catch us, Kofi, you must say you found me dead. You must say you were scavenging my boots. Do you understand? You must save yourself." Kofi didn't answer. he just pulled. The man's instruction was sensible, but it belonged to the world of soldiers and tactics. It did not belong to the riverbed or to the choice to stay. Kofi's morality was simpler. You do not leave a living man. You do not lie to save your own skin. He pulled. The afternoon sun beat down. The journey became a hellish rhythm. Haul, rest, check the wound, offer water, haul again. Joseph drifted in and out of consciousness, his fever spiking. During one lucid moment, he instructed Kofi to find a specific type of broad-leafed plant with red veins. It will fight infection, he rasped. Kofi found it, chewed the leaves into a poultice, and applied it to the angry wound. He had no idea if it would help, but the act of following an order, of having a task beyond pulling, gave him a sliver of hope. Meanwhile, Captain Arto's net was tightening. The drag marks had given them a direction. They deployed trackers, men from the region who could read the forest floor like a book. By late afternoon, they had found Kofi's abandoned lean-to. They found the scratches on the wood. They found the spot by the river where the litter had been built. Captain Arto stood at the riverbank, holding the termite wood with its 217 marks. "A child," he said, his voice icy. "A lone child has been living here, and now he is gone, and so is the general." He looked at his tracker. "How much of a lead do they have?" The tracker examined the crushed grass, the depth of the litter drags. 12, maybe 15 hours, moving very slow. The child is strong, but the weight is too much. They are perhaps here. He pointed to a spot on the map in the rugged hills. If they are going to Nkorkor, they must pass through the saddle. The saddle was a narrow, high pass between two hills, the most direct route. It was also a natural choke point. Arto smiled. It was not a pleasant sight. "Then we will not chase them from behind. We will send a fast team to the saddle. We will wait for them to come to us, and we will end this." Dusk of the second day found Kofi at the base of the final, brutal climb to the saddle pass. He was at the absolute limit. His vision swam with exhaustion. His hands were raw and bloody. Joseph was barely responsive, his breathing a shallow whisper. They had a single mouthful of water left. Kofi looked up at the darkening silhouette of the pass. It was the last major obstacle. Beyond it, the land sloped down toward the lights of the valley. Nkorkor. The thought of it was the only fuel he had left. He did not know that on the other side of that dark ridge, 5 men with rifles had just settled into position, their scopes sweeping the shadows, waiting for a boy and a dying general to walk into a perfect, inescapable kill zone. He smelled them before he saw them. A faint, foreign scent on the night air, cigarette smoke, stale sweat and gun oil. It was wrong. The bush had its own smells, damp earth, green decay, night flowers. This was human, and it was stationary, waiting. Kofi froze, the litter settling silently onto the path. His every sense, honed by months of survival, screamed a warning. He looked up at the dark outline of the saddle pass against the starry sky. It was silent, too silent. No insect chirps, no rustling of nocturnal creatures. They had been scared away. He crouched and shook Joseph's shoulder gently. The general's eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. "We have to go off the path," Kofi whispered, his mouth close to Joseph's ear. "They are in the pass." Understanding cleared Joseph's gaze for a second. He gave the smallest nod. "How many?" "I don't know. I can smell them." A soldier's respect flickered in Joseph's exhausted face. He pointed a trembling finger away from the main trail, toward a steep, scree-covered slope dotted with thorny acacia. "There, it is harder, but they will not watch it." Abandoning the litter was not an option. Joseph couldn't walk. Kofi looked from the safe, watched path to the treacherous slope. He made his choice. He repositioned the vines, took a deep breath, and pulled the litter sideways into the thick brush, aiming for the base of the slope. It was a nightmare. The thorns grabbed at the litter and his skin like claws. The loose scree slid under his feet, threatening to send them both tumbling down in a noisy cascade. Every inch was a battle fought in breathless silence. He moved by feel, by stubbornness, by pure terror. Below and to his left, he could now see the faint glow of a cigarette tip in the darkness of the pass, just 30 yards away. A soldier, bored, waiting. It took an hour to skirt the pass. An hour of agonizing, muscle-tearing effort. When they finally cleared the ridge and began the descent down the other side, Kofi's body was shaking uncontrollably from strain and adrenaline, but they were through. They had bypassed the trap. Captain Arto, waiting in a jeep at the road below the saddle, received the radio call just before dawn. "No contact, Captain. Nothing came through the pass." Arto's calm veneer cracked. They must have. The tracker said this was their only route. Perhaps they turned back or died in the hills. Arto slammed his fist on the dashboard. Osai does not turn back, and the boy has kept him alive this long. They found another way. A terrible new thought occurred to him. If they bypassed the saddle, they would be coming down not on the main road, but into the maze of small farms and compounds on the western edge of the Nkorkor Valley, a populated area. Witnesses, he grabbed the radio. "All units, converge on the Western Valley approach. Quarter-kilometer grid search. Check every hut, every field. The general is severely wounded. He cannot have gone far. And remember the order, erase all witnesses." As the sun rose, Kofi looked down upon the Nkorkor Valley. The town itself was a smudge of tin roofs and dust a few miles away, but between them lay a patchwork of small farms, maize fields, and clusters of mud brick houses. Smoke rose from morning cookfires. It looked like peace. It looked like an end to the journey. But Joseph, lucid again in the cool morning air, gripped Kofi's arm with surprising strength. "We cannot go into the open, not to a farm. They will be watching. We need water, medicine. You need a doctor," Kofi pleaded, his voice cracking. He was empty. The last of the water was gone. His feet were swollen masses of cuts and bruises. "There is a place," Joseph whispered, his eyes scanning the landscape below with a commander's precision. "See the cluster of kapok trees near the stream bend? A small shrine is there, used by farmers. It will have an offering bowl for water. We can wait there until dark. Then we go into the town, not to the garrison, but to the mission hospital. It is run by sisters, neutral." It was a new plan, a final leg. Kofi nodded, too tired to argue. They spent the day hidden in the cool, dim space of the small shrine, a simple structure of mud and thatch. The water in the offering bowl was stale but drinkable. Kofi cleaned Joseph's wound again with the last of the medicinal leaves. The general drifted in and out of a feverish sleep, muttering names, coordinates, orders. Outside, the hunt transformed. Dagadu's soldiers moved from house to house. They weren't subtle. They kicked in doors, questioned farmers at gunpoint, threatened children. The message was clear: hand over the fugitives or be considered collaborators. Fear spread through the Western Valley like a cold mist. An old farmer named Quame, whose field bordered the shrine, saw the soldiers come to his neighbor's compound. He heard the shouts, the crying. He had also seen, just at dawn, a faint movement in the trees near the old shrine, a boy pulling something. He said nothing to the soldiers, but he knew. As dusk fell, Quame slipped from his hut with a clay pot of fresh water and a small packet of plantain paste. He moved quietly to the shrine. When Kofi saw the old man's shadow in the doorway, he scrambled back, a rock in his hand, ready to fight. "Peace, child," Quame said softly, placing the pot and food on the ground. "I am not with them." He looked past Kofi to where Joseph lay. "The whole valley is being torn apart for you. Who is he?" Kofi, disarmed by the kindness, lowered the rock. "He is Joseph. He is a good soldier. The ones in the trucks are bad." Quame knelt, his old knees cracking. He looked at Joseph's face, at the bearing even in sickness. Recognition dawned slowly. "General Osai," he breathed. He had seen his picture in the newspaper years ago when the general had mediated a land dispute in the region. A fair man, a respected man. The old man's eyes filled with a sudden, fierce resolve. "They will find you here. You must get to the mission, but the road is watched," he thought for a moment. "There is an old irrigation ditch. It runs from the stream behind the fields, almost to the back wall of the mission compound. It is dry now. You can stay low in the channel. It is your only chance." Joseph, hearing the conversation, struggled to prop himself up. "You risk your life, old father." Quame met his gaze. "They have already taken my son. What more can they take?" He turned to Kofi. "Can you pull him that far? It is 1 mile, but it is hidden." Kofi looked at the food and water. Strength, however small, returned. Yes. Under the cover of full darkness, they moved. The irrigation ditch was a deep, concrete-lined channel, half filled with dry leaves and debris. It was a tight fit for the litter, but it worked. Kofi pulled, now on his knees, crawling more than walking, the rough concrete scraping his skin. Quaim walked ahead as a scout, a frail lookout in the night. They were 300 yards from the mission's back wall when Quaim suddenly stopped, raising a hand. He pointed. Ahead, where the ditch passed under a small farm road, the silhouette of a soldier stood, smoking, his back to them. A checkpoint. They were blocking even this obscure approach. Kofi's heart sank. It was over. They were trapped in a concrete trench. But Quaim simply turned, his face calm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box of matches. He handed them to Kofi and pointed back the way they had come, to a tinder-dry field of maize stalks bordering the ditch. "When you hear the shouting," he whispered, "you run, you do not look back. You get him to the wall. The sisters will hear you." Before Kofi could protest, the old man climbed out of the ditch and began walking calmly directly toward the soldier at the checkpoint, calling out a greeting. The soldier turned, raising his rifle. "Halt, curfew." Kofi didn't wait. He struck the match and touched it to the dry maize. The parched stalks caught with a soft asterisk whoosh asterisk, flames leaping up greedily, painting the night in orange and shadow. The soldier at the checkpoint shouted, turning from Quaim toward the sudden fire. "Over here, fire." From other points, voices answered. Running footsteps pounded the dirt road. In the chaos, Kofi pulled with a final, desperate burst of energy, the litter rumbling down the ditch, past the distracted soldier, toward the high white wall of the mission. He could see a small iron grate where the ditch passed under it. At the wall, he collapsed, beating his raw hands against the metal. "Help, please help." Inside, a shutter opened. A face framed by a white wimple looked down, then another. Within seconds, the grate was being pulled open from the inside by strong hands. Gentle hands reached for Joseph, pulling him through. Kofi scrambled after. As he fell onto the clean, swept earth of the mission compound, he looked back. Through the grate, he saw the glow of the fire in the field. He saw soldiers running. He did not see old Quaim. They were safe, for now. But as the mission sisters rushed the general into their small infirmary, a new reality set in. They were inside Nkorkor, but the town was not free. Dagadu's soldiers were at the gates. The mission hospital was a sanctuary, but it was not a fortress. And Captain Arto, furious and humiliated, now knew for certain his prey had reached the town. The hunt was no longer in the bush. It was about to come knocking on a holy door. And Colonel Dagadu's orders had been very clear, no exceptions. The pounding on the mission gate began before sunrise. It was not a request. It was the hard, rhythmic thud of rifle butts against wood. Captain Arto's voice cut through the morning quiet. "Open in the name of the National Restoration Council. We have reason to believe enemies of the state are hiding here." Inside the infirmary, Sister Clara, the head of the mission, stood with her hands pressed together, her eyes closed in brief prayer. Then they snapped open, clear and decisive. She turned to the other sisters. "Move the general to the storage cellar. Hide the medical supplies. You," she said, pointing to Kofi, who was having his wounds cleaned by a novice. "Into the chapel, under the pews, do not make a sound." Kofi shook his head, pulling away from the nun's hands. "I should stay with him." "You will do as you are told," Sister Clara said, her voice softening only slightly. "You have brought him this far, now let us do our part." She gestured, and a young sister gently but firmly guided Kofi toward the small stone chapel. The pounding intensified. Arto's patience was gone. "Sister, we will break this gate down." Sister Clara took a deep breath, smoothed her habit, and walked calmly to the heavy wooden gate. She slid open the small viewing slot. "Captain, this is a house of God and healing. You will not break anything. We have intelligence that a wounded fugitive was brought here last night. We must search the premises." "Your intelligence is incorrect. We treat the sick and the poor. We do not harbor fugitives." Arto's face appeared in the slot, his eyes cold. "Then you will not mind if we verify that for ourselves, for the security of the town." Sister Clara held his gaze. "I do mind. This is neutral, sacred ground. Your authority does not extend here." It was a bluff, a fragile one. The mission's protection relied on tradition and fear of international outcry, not law. Arto smiled thinly. Sister, in the new state, my authority extends everywhere. Open the gate, or we will remove it, and we will charge you with obstruction. The standoff lasted 10 seconds. Sister Clara saw the soldiers behind him, rifles ready. She saw the absolute conviction in his eyes. He would do it. With a slow, deliberate movement, she unbolted the gate and swung it open. You may look, but you will not disturb my patients, and you will leave your weapons at the door. This is a hospital. Arto brushed past her, his men filing in behind, ignoring the instruction about weapons. Search every room, every closet, every cupboard. The mission erupted into a violent invasion. Doors were kicked open. Patients cried out in fear. Medicine cabinets were emptied onto the floor. The soldiers were thorough, brutal, and fast. They found nothing. The cellar entrance was hidden by a heavy rug and a stacked pew in the chapel, a temporary hiding spot the sisters had used before. Frustration mounted on Arto's face. He strode back to Sister Clara in the courtyard. Where is he? I have told you, Captain, he is not here. Arto's hand went to his pistol. Do not lie to me, woman. An old farmer was taken into custody this morning. He confessed to getting 2 fugitives to this very wall. He described a boy and a wounded man. Where are they? Sister Clara's heart sank for Quame, but her face remained placid. A frightened old man will say anything to make the shouting stop. You have searched. You have found nothing. Now please leave. Arto was not leaving. He began to circle her, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I know he is here, and when I find him, I will execute him for treason on this very ground. And the boy, the child who helped him, he will be shot for collaborating with terrorists. And you, sister, you will watch. Then we will burn this mission to the ground for aiding enemies of the people. That is the new state. His words hung in the silent courtyard. The other sisters had been gathered, held at gunpoint. The mission's neutrality had been shattered. Then a weak but clear voice spoke from the doorway of the infirmary. You will do none of those things, Captain. Every head turned. Joseph Osai stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame, his face pale and beaded with sweat, but his back straight. He was dressed in a clean, simple hospital gown. The sisters had done their work well, the fever was down, the wound freshly dressed. He looked every inch the general. Arto's jaw went slack for a fraction of a second before his training snapped back. He raised his pistol. General Osai, you are under arrest for treason against the Restoration Council. Joseph ignored the gun. He took one painful, deliberate step forward into the courtyard, then another. His eyes swept over the frightened sisters, the brutal soldiers, and finally settled on Arto. You take your orders from a traitor, Captain. Colonel Dagadu murdered his commanding officers. He overthrew a lawful, if flawed, government. He is poisoning the unity of our armed forces. He is the terrorist. Silence, Arto barked, but his men were listening, their eyes wide. Many knew General Osai by reputation. He was a legend from the peacekeeping days, a soldier's soldier. You men, Joseph continued, his voice gaining strength, echoing off the stone walls. You took an oath to the Republic, to the Constitution, not to one man's ambition. Dagadu has evidence of his crimes locked in my safe in the capital. Evidence of arms deals with warlords, of assassination lists, of stolen funds. He tried to kill me to bury it. This child, he said, pointing toward the chapel, this orphan boy from Ecuries, who you all left for dead, he has more honor in his smallest finger than your colonel has in his entire body. He carried me 30 miles, not for money, not for reward, because it was right. The courtyard was utterly still. The soldiers glanced at each other, uncertain. Arto saw his controls slipping. He is lying to save his skin. Shoot him. That is an order. No one moved. Joseph took another step. Captain Arto, you are a soldier. You know a losing battle. The moment I entered this town, the evidence was no longer only in my safe. It is in the hands of international observers at the border. It was sent the night before Dagadu's coup. He is finished, and you are pointing a gun at the wrong man. It was a gamble, a magnificent, desperate bluff. Joseph had intended to bring the evidence to the border, not send it ahead. But Arto didn't know that. The captain's eyes darted, calculating loyalty, survival, the shifting tide. The crackle of a radio broke the tension. Arto's second-in-command listened, his face turning ashen. He hurried to Arto, whispering urgently. The news from the capital was catastrophic for Dagadu. Loyalist units, long thought neutralized, had mobilized in 2 key barracks, spurred by the confirmed news that General Osai was alive. The international community had issued unanimous condemnations, freezing assets. Dagadu's coup was crumbling from within and without. Arto lowered his pistol, the fight drained from his eyes, replaced by the hollow look of a man who has bet everything on the wrong side. He gave a stiff, formal nod to Joseph. General. The siege of the mission was over. By noon, Captain Arto and his men were disarmed and detained by the Nkoko garrison commander, who, upon seeing Joseph alive, immediately declared for the legitimate government. The news spread through the country like wildfire. The lion of the army was alive. The symbol of integrity had survived. In the following days, Joseph recovered rapidly. From the mission, he coordinated the loyalist resurgence, his voice steady on the radio. Dagadu's regime, built on fear and sudden violence, collapsed within a week. The colonel was found hiding in the basement of his own headquarters. But Joseph's first act, once he could walk, was to find Kofi. The boy was sitting in the mission garden, staring at his bandaged hands as if he didn't recognize them. Joseph sat beside him, moving stiffly. For a long time they said nothing. Finally, Joseph spoke. They found old Quame. He is alive, bruised but alive. He is a hero. Kofi nodded, a small weight lifting. They also found records in Ecuries, Joseph said gently. Survivor lists, your mother's sister. She is in a refugee camp across the border. She has been looking for you. Kofi's head jerked up, tears suddenly brimming in his eyes. A thread to his past, however thin, had been restored. This is the part, Joseph said, his own voice thick, where I am supposed to offer you a reward. A house, money, and education, and I will all of it. But first I must offer you something else. An apology and a thank you. I am sorry our war found you. I am sorry you had to carry its weight on your back. And thank you, Kofi Mensah, for my life, for my country's life. You did not carry a soldier, you carried a future. He placed a hand on Kofi's shoulder. Your aunt will be brought here, you will live with her, but you will also have a home with me for as long as you want it. You will go to the best school, you will want for nothing. Not because I owe you a debt, but because I have seen your character, and this country will need men of character to rebuild it. The story did not end with a grand ceremony, though those would come. It ended quietly, in a garden, with a shattered boy beginning to understand that his world was not gone, but remade. He had set out to save a man. He had inadvertently saved a nation, and in doing so, he had finally saved himself. General Joseph Osai would go on to lead the transitional government, restoring order and paving the way for free elections. But in every speech, he told the story of the boy in the bush, the story of the 30-mile carry. Kofi Mensah would indeed go to school. He would study, heal, and grow. And years later, he would stand beside Joseph, not as a ward, but as a man, a graduate, a symbol of resilience. The orphan and the general, forever linked by a single, impossible act of kindness in the dry riverbed. The war was over, the healing could begin, and it all started when one boy, against all instinct, against all survival, chose not to walk away. So what is the true weight of a single act of courage? Kofi Mensah did not pick up a gun. He did not make a grand speech. He saw a broken man and made a choice that defied every instinct for survival. In that choice, he carried not just a general, but the conscience of a nation. He reminded hardened soldiers of their oath. He showed that in the darkest hour, the most powerful weapon is not fear, but an unwavering refusal to abandon another human being. We often believe that to change history, you need power or armies or vast wealth. But this story tells us something different. It tells us that history sometimes waits, wounded and silent, in a dry riverbed, and its future depends entirely on who walks by and what they do next. Kofi's journey asks each of us a difficult question. In a world that often feels chaotic, where we are bombarded with reasons to look away, to protect ourselves, to mind our own business, would we stop? Would we, in his bare and bleeding feet, choose the harder path? Would we bear a stranger's weight, knowing it might cost us everything? This is not just a story about Africa or a coup or a military general. This is a story about the quiet, immense power of our humanity. It's proof that the most fragile among us can be the strongest, that the most invisible person can become the most essential. Where are you watching this from right now? And what time is it there? I want you to think about that, because in your city, in your town, there are unseen struggles. There are quiet cries for help. The scale may be different, but the principle remains. We create the future one choice, one act of courage, one decision not to walk away at a time. If this story reminded you of the power we all hold, then do not let that feeling fade. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's put this story in front of more eyes. And if you believe in stories that uncover the true heart of humanity, stories that challenge and inspire, then you are in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because there are more incredible, untold stories waiting, and I will see you in the next one.